So I was wondering, can you beat Chimps with only towers that have storm in their name? That means the Ice Monkey Snowstorm, the Glue Gunner Glue Storm, the Monkey Ace Operation Dartstorm, the Druid of the Storm and Superstorm, and finally, the Spike Factory Spike Storm. But there are some rules, like at the end of the game, all your towers must have storm in their name. So this is bad, but this is good. But before we get into it, there's one last thing I want to tell you guys, and that's Quincy. I'm gonna use Quincy because of his level 10 ability, which is Storm of Arrows. I could have also used Gwendolyn, also because of her level 10 ability, which is Firestorm. But I decided to use Quincy. And just to make things a bit more interesting, I chose the map Underground because I like a good challenge. At first, I placed my Quincy at this spot. I put him on first and then on close for these balloons because of some weird targeting issue. I'm still not sure why, but it works. Round 7 was a bit annoying and I couldn't leave Quincy on first. And so after a while, I managed to find this strat where I would put Quincy on strong. I would then change him to first for these 3 balloons, then on last for these 3, and on last again for these 3. Then I would just keep him on first and he would take care of the rest. In the middle of round 8, I placed a Druid in the opposite side of Quincy. This guy would be extremely strong for the early game. After a few rounds of saving up, I got him to Heart of Thunder, and this guy would go crazy. Like absolutely crazy. On this map, Heart of Thunder is just too strong. He took down round 15 with one lightning strike. Like, look at this. What the fuck? By round 20, this setup died, but we had enough money to buy a Spike Factory in the back. On round 22, we died, but again, RNG did its thing. And of course a bit of targeting. Also, seeing how good the Druid is right now, I'm thinking on doing a 2TC with this guy on this map. And so subscribe if you want to see things like that. Now on round 28, we did die because of a single red balloon. But again, there is RNG. We also did die on round 30, but again, RNG. Now there is a small issue right now, and that's that our Druid cannot pop purples. And so we did die on round 32, but we were able to save up $4,500, which was more than enough for another Spike Factory in the back. And to be honest, this has to be one of the most annoying early games ever. I did say earlier that RNG is kinda good, because if we die we can just retry last round, but it really is starting to get annoying. But we did die on round 36, which this time it wasn't caused by RNG, and just not enough popping power. So I bought more spikes on both of my Spike Factory, and that helped a lot. Now, just a small reminder that those 2 Spike Factories will need to become Spike Storms later. But just 2 rounds later, we did die again, and so I bought an Ace this time, which would later become an Operation Dartstorm, which is really good for the mid game. And we did die to round 39, so I started upgrading my Ace to lots more darts. I'm pretty sure you guessed that we wouldn't even be close to have enough popping power for the round for the Moab. So I did try buying Fighter Plane, which did help for the Moab, but not the ceramics. So I bought a Fighter Plane and a Druid of the Storm. Of course, I also used my Quincy level 3 ability. All the way to round 42, where we had a camo problem, since Quincy is the only one that can see them right now. So to help him out, I cross-pathed my Ace with Spy Plane. Then, on round 43, I had a ceramic issue, which would be really common with this challenge. But just buying Operation Dartstorm would help a ton with the early game. Except for fortified ceramics. So this time, I bought a 002 glue gunner, which would later be a glue storm. But the round later, we again had an issue with ceramics, so I upgraded my glue gunner to glue hose. But then guess what? We again had a problem with ceramics on round 49. But Quincy does have an ability for a reason. Now usually, with these types of challenges, you don't want to buy towers until you really need to. But since most of our useful towers are abilities, I just need to guess when I need them, and just wish that I don't need money for something else. And that's why I bought a Spike Storm in the middle of round 50. But luckily, we did need that Spike Storm, since on round 52, we didn't have enough popping power for the 2 Moabs. Now seeing that we already needed to use our abilities, I bought a Glue Strike on round 53, and now you'll probably see me die a lot, but that's because I'm trying to keep as much of my abilities off cooldown for the next round. Like on round 59, I especially needed my Glue Strike off cooldown to handle the Camo LEDs, since it takes down all the immunities off of all the balloons on screen. Surprisingly, for round 60, we didn't even need an ability. My setup was able to handle the BFB on its own. And right after round 60, we were able to afford the Glue Storm. This guy would basically be our most valuable tower. For example, on round 63, I used his ability for the first wave of ceramics. It then lasted all the way to the second wave. And for the last wave, I simply used an Arrow Storm. From now on, rounds would get really more tricky and you'll see me die way more often because they would start introducing way more Moabs and BFBs. Round 65 is a really good example. Finally, what I did to beat it was buy a fighter plane before the round started. I would buy him here. Because I wanted his Pierce upgrade, which is the bottom path, and centered path basically came with it. Anyways, to help with the ceramics, I would use my level 3 Quincy ability and would then be able to buy Operation Dartstorm on my Ace Monkey. At the same time, I did use a Glue Storm, and then for one of the BFBs, I would use an Arrow Storm. All of that would barely take care of everything, while also leaving my Spike Storm off cooldown. Then on round 67, we would have Fortified Camo Ceramics, and all their abilities except for the Spike Storm would be off cooldown. Now I don't know why I didn't use my Spike Storm, but I didn't. So I decided to buy a Cold Snap Deep Freeze Ice Monkey, which did absolutely nothing. Then my brain kicked in and I used the Spike Storm. Also, just a little reminder, if you want to see more from me, please consider subscribing. It would really help the channel, and we're really close to getting to 200 subscribers. Anyways, round 72 was surprisingly easy. All I had to do was use a Spike Storm for the first BFB, and then a level 3 Quincy ability for the ceramics and the second BFB. At the end of the round, I bought a Moab Shredder, and had barely not enough money for a Spike Storm. Finally, after beating round 73, I still didn't quite have enough money for a Spike Storm. But all I had to do was use an ability to pop some ceramics, which would give me enough money to buy it. Then on round 75, we had 5 BFBs with a lot of fortified Moabs. What I ended up doing was use my level 3 Quincy ability for the insides of the first BFB and fortified Moab. I would then use a Glue Storm, which would last the entire round, with a Spike Storm. With this, we were barely able to beat the round with an Arrow Storm and Spike Storm off cooldown. Then skipping a few rounds, all the way to 78, where I used an Arrow Storm for the first wave of ceramics. I would then use a Glue Storm right about here, which is the earliest I can use it, while it's still handling the second wave of ceramics. Using it this early made sure I would have the best cooldown for the next wave. But then, on round 79, it had our biggest weakness, lots of balloons. Since most of our defense are abilities, lots of balloons coming non-stop is really bad. Finally, what I ended up doing is buy a druid here, 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 and here. Then upgrading them all to a 2-2-0. This would make sure to take off the regrow property from basically all the rainbow balloons. When the first BFB popped, I used my level 3 Quincy ability to handle the Moabs, and then an Arrow Storm for the insides. Then, as all the Moabs of the second BFB turned into ceramics, I used a Spike Storm ability. I then basically did the exact same thing for the third BFB, and then for the last one, I would use a Glue Storm. Then, all that was left were 2 fortified BFBs that somehow my setup was able to handle. Surprisingly, all I had to do for this UMG on round 80 was use my level 3 Quincy ability to pop it, and then use a well-timed Arrow Storm for the insides. Then we had round 81, which is basically round 91's annoying younger cousin. What I ended up doing is use my level 3 Quincy ability, then followed by a Glue Storm, which surprisingly handled it. At the end of round 81, I was able to afford a Spike Storm. Then for round 82, I basically did the exact same thing, but with an Arrow and Spike Storm. Round 85 was the first round that had more than one 0MG. That meant that finding the most optimal ability usage would be a bit more tricky. Finally, before the round started, I bought another Spike Storm. I then used my level 3 Quincy ability for the first UMG. Then, to handle the second UMG and the insides of the first UMG, I used a Glue Storm mixed with a Spike Storm. Then, on round 86, I bought my first Ice Monkey, which would later be a Snowstorm. Then, round 87 had 4 UMGs, so I upgraded one of my druids to a Druid of the Storm. For the bottom 2 UMGs, I used the level 3 Quincy ability, and one of the top UMGs would get handled by our pile of spikes. Lastly, I used a Glue Storm and a Spike Storm for all of the insides. Then, that Druid and Ice combo came in clutch and blew back basically every single bloom. Before round 88 started, I bought a Snowstorm. I then used an Arrow Storm for the insides of the BFBs that popped early. Then, for the other BFBs, I used a Spike Storm followed by a Snowstorm to handle all the ceramics. Finally, for the 2 UMGs in the back, I used my Quincy level 3 ability with 2 Spike Storms. Then the Ice and Druids stunned the insides for very long, which helped my other tower's abilities to come off cooldown. Before the DDTs on round 90, I had to go in sandbox mode to see something. I didn't know if a Snowstorm had to be cross-path with the top path for it to affect DDTs. But it did, which meant that I couldn't cross-path it with the bottom path. Finally, after a while on round 89, I ended up using a Glue Storm at the start of the round and Quincy's level 3 ability. I then put him on strong and used his Arrow Storm to take care of one of the fortified BFBs. Then somehow my setup took care of the rest. For round 90, I bought White Hot Spikes on one of my Spike Storms. It wouldn't just take care of the DDTs, but also the Camel Heads. We then had round 91, which was really easy. On round 92, I had to start thinking for the end of the game. So I started upgrading one of my back spike factories to a Spike Storm, since, as I said earlier, but there are some rules. Like, at the end of the game, all your towers must have Storm in their name. So I need to make sure to not forget about that. Anyways, on round 92, I used a Spike Storm for the fortified Moabs, followed by a Glue Storm which would basically last the entire round. With that glue storm, I used a spike storm and Quincy's level 3 ability. After that, I used an arrow storm, and then upgraded my spike factory to a spike storm. And for the 2 ZMGs that were left, I used one last spike storm. Finally, at the end, I played it safe and used a snowstorm for the ceramics. Round 93 really wasn't that bad. What I did was use a glue storm with Quincy's level 3 ability. And since I used a glue storm, I wouldn't need to use the spike factory cross path with whiteout spikes for the DDTs. But I did need to use a spike storm for some of the BFBs. Finally, at the end, I used the well-timed arrow storm for the insides. And the last BFB, I let my setup handle it. But sadly, round 94 was impossible. I was pretty sure that I wasn't going to beat this challenge, but I'd rather do a challenge that is too hard than too easy. I won't show everything, since even at 100 times speed, it still is long, but I will show you guys the attempt that was the most promising. There's a lot happening in that attempt, so I don't know if I'll manage to explain everything, but at least I'll try my best. Before the round started, I bought a fighter plane. I then used my snowstorm to try and have all my abilities off cooldown for when I'll use my glue storm. Then some mobs started getting far, so when they popped, I used my glue storm to handle the ceramics. I also used my Quincy's level 3 ability, and then starting using my spike storms with a 1 second cooldown between them. I also was able to afford the Operation Dart Storm. After that, I placed another ace right about here and went for another fighter plane. As soon as my arrow storm was off cooldown, I used it, which gave me just enough money to buy fighter plane. I was then able to use a snowstorm to stun a bit, and then, well, I didn't have any more abilities, so I died. Thank you for watching, I hope you enjoyed, and if this video gets to 50 likes, I'll retry this challenge, but on Peninsula. I'm pretty sure it's gonna be a bit easier, but I don't know if it will be possible. Anyways, please consider subscribing. I'm begging you, please.